and we're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's April 24th here in Seoul. I'm Shin, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dainha.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Happy Monday. And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. We're going to start off with our news feed as usual, a news feed which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, the first one is the National Assembly Budget Office on Sunday found that people in South Korea worked an average of 1,915 hours in 2021. That was the fourth highest in the OECD. Mexico topped the list with over 2,100. Costa Rica came next with a little over 2,000 hours. The next item is BTS member Suga. He recorded the biggest first-day album sales of any K-pop artist with his solo album D-Day. The music industry on Saturday said Suga's latest album sold more than 1.07 million copies on the first day. Now, this surpassed what his BTS colleague Jimin achieved last month with his solo Face. Korean Women's Development Institute found in a survey that only a little over 11% of individuals correctly understood the definition of domestic violence. The survey found most people consider domestic abuse to only be when men lay hands on women and not the other way around. The survey was conducted in November last year with some 754 respondents. Now let's take a closer look at the third news item. So most respondents only considered husbands hurting their wives as domestic violence. But according to the Domestic Violence Punishment Act, domestic violence is any abusive act between family members, including violence against one's husband, children, and even siblings. The Korea Family Law Counseling Center in 2018 even found that out of 324 domestic violence perpetrators, 21% were female. Now, here in the studio, Walter, were you well aware that domestic violence includes when wives or females hurt their husband or male counterparts?
Yeah, so actually I studied criminology as my degree, and therefore we heard about this subject quite a lot. And yes, most cases are when a male attacks a female or a male attacks the children, etc. But there are many cases out there that are unreported of female attacking the male or the spouse, the female spouse attacking the male spouse. Now, there are many reasons why we don't, or males do not report this. Some are traditional, like people don't want to know that their wives are beating up their husbands. It's, I guess, demasculate, like it makes them feel less of a man. Therefore, they don't want to tell anybody, and therefore this is why we have such a low statistic. Right. I guess most people would ask the question, why don't you leave a domestic violence situation? However, it's a lot more difficult than that. So a lot of people love their spouse. A lot of people think what they're doing is normal because it's maybe something that they grew up in. But unfortunately, it's not. And if you or anyone you know is in this situation, professional help needs to be applied straight away.
And you know what breaks my heart whenever I hear of any abusive act being held is actually the victims feel ashamed of what they're going through. Absolutely. It's never the perpetrators or assailants, it's always the victims, right? But that shouldn't be the case. And another reason that's deeply associated with domestic violence is drinking matters. And I would like to hear your thoughts on this, Cheska. What do you think about domestic violence, and what's your stance on this matter?
Absolutely. There are some counseling options that are available, funded and operated by the government, but there are still so many domestic violence that are happening behind closed doors that there should be an increase of these public services available to people. And as Yeon, you rightfully mentioned, there are many other clinical disorders or conditions that can be associated with the assailant. So always seek professional help, not just for yourself, but more for the assailant. And also, violence has rippling effect. So it not only affects your children, but also your life outside. So definitely seeking professional help is incredibly important because any form of violence is a crime.
It is a crime, and that was our news feed for this Monday. We're now going to move on to today's discussion topic. Just last week, South Korea saw yet another K-pop star take his own life, and Moonbin, member of the boy band ASTRO, took his own life only at the age of 25. Now, Moonbin's death brought to surface the immense stress and depression many K-pop stars actually have to go through on a daily basis, and that's why today we're going to be talking about youth depression, an ongoing societal issue that needs more action here in Korea and around the world. Emotions are contagious. That's why psychologists say we must be on the lookout for copycat suicide cases following high-profile deaths. Experts explained young people tend to identify closely with celebrities they respect or admire. But once their favorite celebrity chooses to take his or her own life, young fans feel like they've lost a part of their identity and feel insignificant and helpless. It's not just celebrities, though. Watching news on similar-aged people taking their own lives can take a toll on one's mental health. Recently, we've seen local headlines covering one youth suicide after another. One teen threw herself off a 19-story building while streaming live on social media. A man in his 20s and a woman in her 30s killed themselves after losing all the money they put into GenZ deposits. South Korea has long been notorious for having the highest suicide rates among all OECD countries. That's why NewsGen aims to look for answers to 3 questions. 1. Why are we still seeing a high suicide rate in Korea? 2. The country is especially seeing many young people take their own lives. Why and how can this be prevented? 3. What are some efforts being made at the moment and how can they be improved? Over the past few weeks, we've heard a lot of upsetting news about young people taking their own lives here in Korea, and experts are worried that youth depression and chances of suicide could be on the rise. So let's first look back at the reality that has made many depressed. Cheska?
Absolutely. Now, I think the COVID pandemic definitely served as a catalyst to bring this issue to surface, but depression among youth generation has always been a growing concern. As we saw in the VCR today, just this week, we had 3 separate accounts of teenagers committed suicide on a death leap. And of course, the GenZ fraud and the socio-economic situations, such as group bullying in a corporate, pushed some of these young people over the brink, causing irrevocable and very unfortunate death. Now, not to mention that just last Wednesday, Moonbin, the famous K-pop star from boy band ASTRO, also committed suicide. And as we all know, this isn't the first young K-pop star who took one's own life, and which are all really warning signs that mental health issues are very dire and imperative and can no longer really be put in the back burner anymore.
It can. And here on NewsGen, as you mentioned, we covered Moonbin's death in our news feed last week. And I remember, Walter, you were there as one of our panelists. We were very shocked to hear this happen. And while it's not the first time to see a K-pop star take his or her own life, it's very hard every single time we hear about it. But why do you think Moonbin's death in particular shook us so much?
I think it was probably the popularity of Moonbin himself and also his age. A lot of people point to the age, especially when they're in their 20s. Moonbin was 25, he was all over TV. But as Cheska mentioned, it's not the first time and it's hopefully going to be the last time, but we don't know.
Right.
Like example, Seoul, she was 25, Guhara 28, Jonghyun was 27, and also recently an actress model by the name of Jung Chae-yul was 26. Now this is very shocking numbers as they're all in their mid-20s. Waves of condolences came from not just Korean fans, but international fans from Moonbin. And obviously people were devastated, and rightly so. And as I mentioned on Friday, choosing to end one's own life isn't easy. It takes a lot of pain, it takes a lot of hurt, and all they want to do is stop the pain. And though we see the smiles on these K-pop idols' faces, it's sometimes a different story behind the mask. And sadly, here in South Korea, I do still think that depression and suicide have somewhat been stigmatized. People look down on it still, and this is not the way it should be.
Exactly. There's still a lot more education, and raising awareness is important because some people are still blaming people who took their own lives of being weak.
Absolutely.
But that's not the case. Mental health is much more complicated than that, and it's a clinical thing that you need to get treated for. And that's why Moonbin's sudden death brought more light to the growing number of young people suffering from depression.
Absolutely.
So tell us more about this, Cheska.
Absolutely. So again, this is a growing concern among our generation. As data shows, there was a huge spike, especially 20s and 30s, post-COVID, being treated for depression and anxiety. And according to Health Insurance Review and Assessment Service, between the 5 years, from 2017 to 2021, the number of patients in the 20s skyrocketed to, hear this, 128%.
Wow.
This is the highest spike among all age groups, closely followed by the 30s. Now, medical experts say that due to immense socio-economic pressure, and both at work and at home, many young people feel very defeated,
Of course.
entrapped, and very vulnerable, especially because of the stigma attached to it as well. Now, in South Korea, I think people see depression more as a lack of willpower or a matter of vulnerability rather than a clinically identified disorder that needs quick treatment, early diagnosis, and a series of help. And this snowballs into severe depression and eventually unfortunate circumstances such as this.
Definitely, you mentioned really good points there, and experts are actually quite afraid that the line of suicide effects can actually cause the Werther effect, and that's aka copycat suicide.
Exactly, yeah.
Because this effect was first scientifically explained in the 1970s, and experts found a correlation between a growing number of suicide cases after media reports. And what are your thoughts on this, Cheska?
You know, this is a very interesting topic because the CDC actually claims that as of now, the Gen Z, the second highest reason for death, is suicide, which means that this age group is very vulnerable to what happens around them, whether it's close friends or family, or as you mentioned, Werther effect, even role models. But Werther effect isn't just limited to role models. Actually, just a week ago, as you saw in the VCR, a teenager, viral footage on social media of the process of the suicide, which left comments of trauma and, you know, these vivid images being ingrained in people's mind. So these potentially dire consequences could instigate a certain behavior. However, I want to make a very clear distinction here that experts say that an open and honest discussion about suicide has absolutely no effect on instigating these behaviors. It's the more viral images and very vivid discussions on social media that could potentially have this effect.
And thank you for mentioning that point, because that's what we're trying to do on today's episode of News Generation. We're trying to have an open and honest discussion about depression. You shouldn't be ashamed of it. We should be talking about it more to better treat it. And Walter, depression isn't only confined to our national borders, though. You can see youth depression everywhere globally. So what are some young people around the world going through mentally, and how could a famous K-pop star's sudden death, or even just similar-aged youth committing suicide, affect people worldwide?
Yeah, well, sadly, as we saw before, South Korea has the highest rate of suicide amongst the OECD countries. I mean, if we take a look at the global scale, 264 million people suffer from depression worldwide, and this is according to the World Health Organization back in 2020. Now, in the US, 17.3 million adults, that's 7.1% of the adult population, have at least one major depressive episode. Adolescents, from as early as 12 years old, which is shocking to think. Through to 17 old, they have the highest rate of major depressive episodes with 14.4, and followed by young adults 18 to 25, 13.8%. Now, how old are most K-pop fans? We would put them in that bracket. Now, we can't say the reasons why they did that is because of what's happening with, you know, certain celebrities. But there are many different reasons, but yes, it's a scary number, especially starting from the age of 12.
I know, that's very shocking. 12, it's such a young age. So we can say we're in a global mental health crisis, as we're seeing 1 in 4 young people worldwide experience depression symptoms. So now let's include a mental health expert to find out what exactly causes this and how we can deal with it. So we're now going to hear from a psychiatrist certified both in the United States and South Korea. It's Dr. Lee Ju-young from Cambridge Health Alliance. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you again, Dr. Lee.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, it's great to see you again on our show today. We're going to be talking about a relatively grim and serious matter, youth depression, and we're seeing more of it around the world. So Dr. Lee, what do you think is causing this spike?
Yeah, the rate of youth depression has skyrocketed over the past 10 years. This trend has been also reported in Korea, not just globally. And today, I'll list three important factors. First is the thing I already mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic. So people were isolated and their freedom was limited. As of October 2020, almost 30% of Korean youth reported anxiety and depression-related symptoms, compared to 20% prior to the pandemic, which was already high. Second is the rise of technology and widespread social media use. So social media, it's a kind of a misnomer, as it's related to social, but it's known to increase the sense of isolation actually and disrupts young people's self-esteem. Lastly, I'd like to mention increasing academic pressure and competition. So young people are pressured to be perfect in this hyper-competitive society. And this was well portrayed in the Korean TV show, like Sky Castle.
Absolutely, Doctor. I think you mentioned some of the really good points that do affect a lot of teenagers and young people here in South Korea, such as, self-esteem and the pressure to perform. And there's definitely data showing that there's a growing number of young people suffering from depression and anxiety. What are some of the early symptoms that we can probably catch for early diagnosis? And what are some ways that we can stop it from developing it into a clinical health condition?
Yeah, this is a very challenging question because we don't know yet which symptoms come first, like a warning sign or like harbinger. But I will share some of the cardinal symptoms of depression and anxiety. One is you're sad and hopeless almost every day. Second, you notice that nothing is fun anymore. 3, you sleep not as much or maybe too much. 4, you become restless and feel like being on edge constantly. 5, you worry about too many things, which makes you hard to make decisions. 6, you think you'd be better off dead. And if your friends and family say you look depressed or anxious, talk about what makes them think so, because when others start to notice, it may mean something.
Right, actively seeking counseling or actively talking with people could help you better diagnose whether you have these early symptoms of depression. But even though some people do go for counseling or on medication, they still might not be able to control strong waves of depression or rampant mood swings, sometimes even to the point they just want to give up on everything. So that's why many are calling for better measures to proactively look for young people who might be too mentally unstable to ask for help themselves, whether that be local authorities or doctors providing better counseling or infrastructure. As a doctor yourself, what are your thoughts on this?
So this is such a thought-provoking question. So routine screening for depression and anxiety outside psychiatry clinics can be very effective. So many primary care physicians, like pediatricians, are routinely screening for mental health issues during annual wellness visits. And public school systems do something similar and make referrals to psychologists and psychiatrists. More recently, mental health clinicians are proactively moving into pediatrician offices and schools. This is called integrated care model, and the result has been fantastic. It lowers stigma around psychiatric care. Also, it allows faster and more effective interventions. There is also growing controversy around depression screening through people's electronic device use. Should we make it legal to intervene if a computer algorithm picks up any problematic internet use, such as searching for suicide-related information? So a lot of discussion is needed because this change will happen at the cost of our privacy.
I think it's absolutely amazing that now we're putting mental health issues within pediatricians as well, because as we saw before, starting from the ages of 12, which, being 12, I can't even imagine what it's like to be depressed at that point. But are there any final words you'd like to share with for the youth who are maybe going through depression?
Yeah, depression is not about your willpower, so don't listen to people when they say, just snap out of it, because it doesn't work that way. Depression changes how your brain works, so nerve cells in certain brain areas become less densely branched than before. This will make you difficult to discover hope and think flexibly. So it is tough to tackle depression alone, so stay connected to people around you who can listen to your struggles non-judgmentally and seek professional help. Mental health professional will be there for you in every step of the way to your recovery. And lastly, there's a hotline young people can reach out to when they're in crises. In Korea, dial 1388.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. Take it from a professional. Seek professional help. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Dr.
much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. And Dr. Lee made many fascinating points. What caught my attention was routine screening.
Yes.
Didn't you think that was really nice? That was a good idea, even among pediatricians?
Absolutely. Like that was what allows for early diagnosis and people to catch it on quickly, which would allow for early treatment and bettering of a mental situation just in general.
Right. And Walter, what did you think of all the comments that Dr. Lee made? Which caught your attention the most?
Obviously, being a new dad and hoping for the best for my daughter for the future, I would like her to be as happy as she possibly can be. And I hope that, if she is going through a bad time, that she has the professional help that she can get.
And I'm very happy that we're now talking about mental health on air, on the news,
So
more
happy
forums.
today.
Exactly.
Happy.
We need more of this. Now, before we continue our talks, though, let's also hear from our global viewers. So we asked whether they had suffered from depression and what helped them recover. So take a look at the screen. Veroka said, I've been suffering from major depression for several years now. Regular exercise and being around friends helps with managing it day to day. But typical treatments such as medication and therapy have done very little to help treat my condition. Cool Yoshi said, I used to have both depression and suicidal thoughts because of my social anxiety and getting bullied. Tara Spell said, I was sexually abused as a child and suffered major depression throughout my teenage years. And what helped me go through this was group therapy sessions with other sexual abuse survivors and realizing I wasn't alone. And before we go on to our final thoughts, I would just like to thank our viewers for being so courageous and brave to be opening up with us. I mean, Dr. Lee, as he mentioned, it's so important to have an honest and open discussion about mental health and bring it out to the surface. Now, before we end up, I would like to ask our panelists for their final thoughts. Mental health is just as important as taking care of your physical body, right, Cheska?
Absolutely. I would even go so far as to say it is just as, or sometimes even more, because a lot of the mental conditions that happen do cause rippling effect on the physical conditions as well. And this has been scientifically proven. Now, in South Korea, just over the past 5 years, 1 out of 5 adults have been clinically diagnosed with depression. So you're definitely not alone in this. And according to the WHO, it is clinically identified under the ICD medical code that this medical disorder includes depression and anxiety. So please do not think of it as a lack of willpower or vulnerability and seek medical help as you would if you have a physical condition.
Exactly. And nowadays, thanks to the advancement of internet, you can diagnose yourself online, right? But there are other options out there. I would wonder if you have any tips or advice you'd like to share yourself.
Well, first I'd like to say, I or the rest of the cast here may not mean something to you. We're just the people on TV, but there are people out there that mean a lot to you and you mean a lot to them. Understand that though you may not feel important, or you may feel hopeless, lost, tired, alone, sick of everything and anything, and you don't want to feel anything, but you should really know that you really are important and you are needed, you matter, and you are worth it and you are loved. And you're not alone in this, as Jessica mentioned, and you also make others feel better. So surround yourself with very good people. Get rid of those who give you negative energy, and like we mentioned, being depressed isn't a weakness.
It isn't.
And seeking professional help isn't anything you should be ashamed of.
And if you're having difficulty talking about depression or seeking counseling or trying to seek counseling, try calling 1393 or 157-0199. Now, we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska
The
Deinhoff.
pleasure was mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.